Welcome to Best Flaring Practices. Let's get right into it, Roland. Can you go into detail about the tools we use for making flares?
Sure, I'll go over some basic hand tools right here. So, different types of flaring blocks and yokes that you can use to perform a flare. I like this one because it does have a length guard on that, so you know your pipe height is exact every single time. There are also ratchet release, so once that flare is made, this will release and you won't over torque and damage the integrity on the bottom of the flare. We also have battery operated ones. It's really all about your preference. Other pieces of equipment that we use are your pipe cutter, your smaller pipe cutter, different types of reaming tools we have. Handheld, this is a reaming tool that does both the outside and the inside for your flare.
All right. Well, so what's the next step would be prepping the copper, correct?
Okay, so first thing I want to do is I want to demonstrate how I cut a piece of copper. It is soft drawn copper, so one thing you want to remember is not to over torque the cutter on each revolution. So I don't want to change the integrity of the copper, so I'm just going to give it a little bit of tension, make a couple turns, a little bit more tension, make a couple turns.
It's not a race, correct?
It's not a race. Once again, just nice and easy. Couple revolutions until that copper falls off. Okay. And then you can see after I cut the copper, you do have a lip on the inside and it's beveled in on the outside. And that's what we use the reaming tool for. So we'll clean the outside of that copper. It's good to keep it facing down, keep any metal particles outside of the pipe. And I'm just reaming the outside, make it nice and smooth, take it out any irregular formations from the cut, and I'm reaming the inside. After I do that, I just want to inspect it, make sure that it's nice and clean. I have no nicks on it, looks pretty smooth, pretty well prepped for making a flare.
So at this point, we're ready to make a flare.
Yeah, we can make a flare right now.
Okay.
So I'm going to take this piece, right, I do want to go over this though. So different types of flare nuts. We like you to use the flare nut that's off the piece of equipment. Mitsubishi makes a heavier flare. You can get a flare from the supply house. You'll see that the Mitsubishi flare is much heavier than a traditional one from the supply house. So, and you also know it's a match set. So the first thing I want to do is, put my flare on. Okay, in this case, I'm going to use the battery operated one. And just different ones you can use. So this has a flare guide on it, so that makes the pipe length coming into the block the perfect length.
And just making sure we don't really push it up in there, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Make
just
it flush.
Nice and loose. Put it in there. All right, it seats.
And what it's doing is going in.
It's making the flare. When it knows it hits, bottoms out, it goes in return, reverse direction. So now that the flare is made, I simply take it out, remove it from the block, and there's my flare. And that looks pretty darn good. So what I'm going to do now is just check it to the flared nut. And I'm just looking for that to come down, just barely touch the threads and seat perfectly on the bottom, which this does. So that's a good flare.
Okay. And another thing we can use is also using a flaring gauge.
Yeah.
Okay.
We can do that as well. So as I'm going to make the connection to the unit, I am going to take some oil. I like to use either refrigerant oil, the same type that is in the system, or vacuum pump oil. It is dehydrated. And I'm simply going to wipe a little bit of oil on the inside of the flare, the outside of the flare, and on the flare connection to the unit. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that onto the flare itself, hold it with my hands as straight as possible so I know that it's seating flush on that. Take the flaring nut, tighten it with my hand as much as possible, and once I do that, I'm going to pull out my torque wrench, look up what torque pounds it should be, and make the adjustment.
And where will you find those specifications?
mylinkdrive.com.
On the install manual that we're working on.
On
correct?
the install manual, that's correct.
Okay. And then let's talk about line sets for a little bit.
Okay, so a lot of people get pre-line sets with flares on them. The flare is perfect, it is factory made, but we like to cut that flare off and remove it and use a flare from the unit so we know we have a match set for that. That's what we recommend.
Okay. Another thing I always like to point out too is a lot of people think this is a plug.
It's not a plug.
No, it's not. What it's doing is protecting the actual threads for the flare.
And preventing anything, particles getting inside the pipe.
Correct. And sometimes, in some cases, some line sets actually have plugs inside as well that we have to make sure. Always have to verify what's in our line set.
And that's a good point. So you always want to make sure that the inside of that pipe is clear of any protection it has while it's in the shipping process.
All right.
Okay?
Thank you so much for joining. We'll catch you on the next one.
All right.